Nobody wants to sit next to a homeless man until one girl does. And that's when everything changes. The subway station hums like a restless heartbeat, metal wheels screaming against tracks somewhere in the distance, warm air mixing with the cold draft that sneaks down from the street above, and people move fast, eyes down, shoulders tight, like everyone is late for something that matters more than anything else. And right there in the middle of it all, on a long gray bench under flickering fluorescent lights, sits a man no one wants to notice. His coat worn thin at the elbows, fabric darkened by rain, his boots scuffed and damp, a paper cup by his feet that barely holds a few coins, and every time someone walks past, they shift just slightly farther away. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to make it clear, enough to say without words, not here, not near me, not today, and he watches them without really watching, eyes quiet, unreadable, like he's seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times before, because in a way he has, just not like this, not from this side, not with the cold biting through layers that used to be custom-tailored, not with the weight of invisibility pressing down on him heavier than any boardroom expectation ever could, because tonight, Ethan Carter, billionaire, CEO, the man whose name sits on glass towers and billion-dollar deals, has chosen to disappear, to become the one person the world looks through instead of at, and for hours, that's exactly what happens. People pass. Conversations drift, laughter echoes, but no one stops, no one sits, no one even meets his eyes, until she appears, moving slower than the rest, like the world has already taken more out of her than it has to give, her jacket thin against the chill, her hair slightly damp from the rain outside, and in her hands, a small cardboard box tied with a fading bakery string, the kind that's been opened and closed too many times in one day. She hesitates just a second as she reaches the bench, her gaze flickering over him, not with fear, not with disgust, just seeing him, really seeing him. And then she notices the empty space beside him, the one space no one else has claimed, and for a moment, you can almost feel the decision forming, the quiet war between exhaustion and kindness, between keeping her head down like everyone else and doing something small that no one would ever reward her for. And then she exhales softly and sits, right there, right next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touch, close enough that the unspoken rules of distance are broken in a single, simple movement. And Ethan doesn't react right away, because that's the part that always comes next, the hesitation, the quick apology, the person realizing their mistake and standing up again. But she doesn't move. She just sets the box in her lap and rubs her hands together for warmth, glancing at him once more before offering a small, tired smile that feels real in a way nothing else around here does. And for the first time that night, something shifts, something quiet but undeniable. Because out of everyone rushing past, out of every person who chose comfort over connection, she is the only one who decided that an empty seat next to a forgotten man wasn't something to avoid. It was somewhere to belong. She keeps her hands wrapped around the small cardboard box like it is the only thing grounding her, fingers slightly red from the cold. And after a few seconds of silence, she exhales a quiet breath that fogs the air in front of her, then glances sideways at him again, not with curiosity, not with suspicion, but with a kind of tired awareness that feels heavier than both of them combined. And when she finally speaks, her voice is soft but steady. It is colder down here than outside tonight. Like she is talking about the weather, but meaning something else entirely, and Ethan shifts just slightly, not because he is uncomfortable, but because no one has spoken to him like that all evening. Not like a problem to solve or a person to avoid, just someone sitting in the same cold air. It gets that way. He replies, keeping his tone low, careful, still inside the role he chose to play, and she nods like she expected that answer, like she has heard it before in different forms from different people. Then she opens the box slowly, revealing two slightly uneven waffles, the kind that did not sell, the kind that gets left behind at the end of a long shift, and she studies them for a second, almost calculating something in her head, before breaking one in half and holding a piece out toward him. "You should eat something," she says, simple, direct, no pity wrapped around it, just a statement of fact. And for a moment, Ethan does not reach for it, not because he does not want it, but because he is watching her, trying to understand the logic. behind a choice that does not benefit her in any visible way. You might need it more, he answers, testing her, gently, like placing a piece on a board to see how the other player moves. But she shakes her head immediately, a small, almost amused breath escaping her. I know what hungry feels like, she says, and there is something in the way she says it that makes it clear this is not a guess, not a temporary inconvenience, but something she has lived through long enough to recognize in others without asking questions. This is not about who needs it more, she adds, pressing the piece slightly closer to him. It is just about not pretending you do not. And that lands somewhere deeper than he expects, because all night he has been invisible by design. But she refuses to let him disappear that easily, and after a brief pause, he takes the waffle from her hand, their fingers brushing for the smallest second, her skin cold, his colder, and he nods once. Thank you, he says, and it feels strange to mean it this much over something so small. She gives a faint shrug like it is nothing, but her shoulders relax just a little, like sharing that piece cost her more than she wants to admit. And for a while, they sit there in quiet, the noise of the station filling the space between them, announcements echoing, footsteps rushing, a distant train arriving with a roar that vibrates through the bench beneath them, and she leans back slightly, eyes drifting toward the tracks. I used to think people ignored each other because they were busy, she says after a moment, her voice almost lost under the noise. Now I think it is because stopping would make them feel something they are not ready for. Ethan glances at her, studying her profile, the way her expression stays calm even as her words carry weight. And you are ready for that? He asks quietly, and she lets out a small breath that almost turns into a laugh, but does not quite make it. No, she admits, honest in a way that feels disarming. But I do it anyway. And she reaches into her bag, pulling out a worn gray scarf, the fabric slightly frayed at the edges, and without making a big gesture out of it, she leans forward, just enough to drape it loosely around his shoulders, adjusting it once like it is the most normal thing in the world. Keep it, she says before he can protest, her tone gentle but firm. I have another one at home. Even though something in her eyes suggests that might not be entirely true, and Ethan sits there, the warmth of the scarf settling against his neck, the faint scent of detergent, and something softer lingering in the fabric, and for the first time since he started this experiment, he does not feel like he is observing the world from the outside. He feels like he has stepped into something real, something unfiltered, and as the train pulls in with a rush of wind, people crowd forward, filling the space, but neither of them moves right away, because for a brief moment, in the middle of noise and motion and indifference, two strangers have created something quiet that the rest of the world does not even notice. The train doors slide open with a sharp metallic chime, and the crowd surges forward in a practiced rhythm, bodies brushing past, coats damp from the rain, voices overlapping in hurried fragments. But Lily does not stand right away. She watches the movement like she is deciding whether to follow it or resist it, and then she turns back to him, studying his face for a second longer than before, as if committing something to memory without knowing why. You should take this train, she says, softly, nodding toward the open doors. It gets colder after 8, and there is no urgency in her voice, just quiet advice, the kind people give when they expect nothing in return. And Ethan glances at the train, then back at her, aware that every second he stays stretches the moment beyond what it was meant to be. But something in him hesitates, something unfamiliar. What about you? He asks, and she lifts one shoulder in a small shrug, eyes flicking toward the schedule board above them. I have time, she says, though her fingers tighten slightly around the empty box in her lap, betraying a truth she does not say out loud. That time is the one thing she cannot really afford, and he notices that. The subtle tension, the quiet calculation behind her calm, and it makes him look at her differently, not as someone offering kindness from abundance, but from a place of scarcity, and that realization lands heavier than anything else tonight. You should not miss your ride because of me, he says, testing the line between concern and the role he is still supposed to play. But she shakes her head again, a faint smile touching her lips. I am not missing it because of you, she replies. I am just not chasing it tonight. And there is something in that sentence that feels bigger than a train, like she has spent too long running after things that never waited for her in return. And for a moment, Neither of them speaks. The doors begin to close, the train pulling away with a low rumble that fades into the tunnel. And the platform grows quieter, emptier, colder, and Lily exhales slowly, leaning back against the bench, her eyes closing for just a second as if she is gathering herself. And when she opens them again, she looks at him with a softness that does not come from pity, but from recognition. "You should not stay out here all night," she says gently. "There is a shelter 3 blocks up on Lexington. They have hot soup after 9, she adds, like she has memorized the details from experience rather than research. And Ethan listens carefully, storing every word, every direction, because this is no longer just observation. This is insight he never had access to before. "Do you go there?" he asks, and she hesitates just a fraction too long before answering. "Sometimes," she says, her voice steady but quieter now. And that single word carries more weight than a full explanation ever could, and he nods slowly, understanding more than she is willing to say. And then, almost without thinking, he asks, "Why did you sit here?" And the question lingers between them, simple but direct, and Lily looks down at her hands for a moment, rubbing her thumb over a small tear in the cardboard box, as if searching for the right words in something worn and familiar. "Because I have been the person no one sits next to," she says finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I remember what that feels like." And that answer lands deeper than anything else she has said, because it is not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest in a way that does not ask to be understood. And Ethan feels something shift again, something that was never part of the plan, because this was supposed to be a test, a controlled environment, a way to measure reactions and confirm assumptions. But there is nothing controlled about this moment, nothing measurable about the quiet dignity of a girl who has nothing left to give and still chooses to give it anyway. And as the station clock ticks forward, marking time that neither of them seems ready to leave behind, he realizes that whatever he thought he was searching for tonight, he may have already found it sitting right beside him, wrapped in a worn scarf, in a simple act that no report or data set could ever capture. Another train passes without slowing, its roar filling the space between them before fading into a distant echo. And for a moment the station feels almost suspended in time, like the world has moved on but left this small pocket untouched. And Lily glances up at the clock again, the second hand ticking louder now in the quiet, her shoulders tightening just slightly as reality begins to press back in. "I should go soon," she says, not to him exactly, but to herself, like she is reminding her body to keep moving even when it does not want to. And Ethan nods, though something in him resists the idea of this ending here, not because he needs more data, not because the experiment requires it, but because this moment feels unfinished in a way he cannot quite explain. "Which way are you heading?" he asks, careful to keep his voice neutral, but she studies him for a second before answering, as if weighing whether that question carries more meaning than it should. "Downtown," she says finally, "about 1.5 miles from here." And he notices the detail, the exact distance, the way she measures her life in blocks and steps instead of miles driven or flights taken. And before he can stop himself, he says, "That is a long walk in this weather." And she lets out a small breath that almost sounds like a laugh. "It is not the longest one I have done," she replies, and that simple sentence carries a quiet resilience that settles into him deeper than anything else tonight. And as she stands, brushing her hands against her jeans, he instinctively starts to rise as well, but she gestures lightly for him to stay seated. "You should keep your energy," she says, her tone gentle but firm, like she has already decided what matters more in this moment. And then she pauses, looking at him again, really looking this time, as if trying to place something she cannot quite name. "You do not belong out here," she adds softly, and the words land with unexpected weight, because they are not said with judgment, not with assumption, just with a quiet certainty that sees through more than he intended to reveal. And for a split second, Ethan feels the urge to tell her the truth, to break the line between who he is and who he is pretending to be. But he stops himself, because this moment, this version of him, is the only one that gave him access to her honesty, and changing it now would change everything. "Maybe I do," he says instead, and she tilts her head slightly, studying him like she knows that answer is not the full story. But she does not push, she just reaches down and adjusts the scarf once more around his shoulders, making sure it is secure against the cold, her fingers quick but careful. Then at least stay warm, she says, and there is something final in the way she says it. Like she has given what she can and now has to walk away from it. And as she turns, stepping into the thinning crowd, Ethan watches her go, her figure moving steadily toward the exit, not rushing, not hesitating, just continuing forward like she always does. And for a moment, he remains frozen, caught between the role he created and the reality he just experienced. And then something shifts inside him, something that no longer fits within the boundaries of an experiment, because this was never supposed to feel personal. It was never supposed to follow him beyond this bench. But as he looks down at the scarf around his neck, still carrying the faint warmth she left behind, he realizes that whatever he thought he was testing tonight, it has already begun to change him in ways he cannot ignore. And as the station grows quieter, the last rush of commuters fading into the night, he stands slowly, his eyes fixed on the direction she disappeared, knowing that letting her walk away like this would mean turning this moment into just another observation, just another story, he tells himself. And for the first time since this began, that does not feel like enough. The cold air hits harder once he steps out of the station, sharper, cleaner, carrying the faint smell of rain and concrete. And for a second Ethan just stands there at the top of the stairs, scanning the sidewalk as people move past him in quick, practiced lines, umbrellas brushing shoulders, footsteps echoing in uneven rhythms. And then he sees her, already halfway down the block, walking with the same steady pace she had before. Not fast, not slow, just consistent, like stopping is never really an option for her. And without thinking too much about it, he starts moving, keeping a few steps behind, not close enough to alarm her, but not far enough to lose sight of her either, the scarf around his neck catching a bit of wind as he turns the corner she just passed. And for a moment he wonders what he is doing, because this was never part of the plan. There was no line in any strategy that said follow the one person who showed kindness, but something about the way she walked away, like she had already given everything she could afford to give, made it impossible to stay on that bench and pretend this was just another observation. And up ahead, Lily slows slightly near a small pharmacy, the neon sign flickering above the door, and she stops just outside, standing there for a few seconds longer than someone normally would, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets as she looks through the glass, her reflection faint against the bright shelves inside. And Ethan watches from across the street, noticing the hesitation, the quiet calculation again. And then she pushes the door open and steps inside, the bell above it ringing softly, and he follows after a short pause, entering just as she reaches the counter, the warmth inside wrapping around him in contrast to the cold outside. And he keeps his distance, pretending to browse a shelf near the back while his attention stays fixed on her, the way she leans slightly toward the pharmacist, speaking in a low voice, her expression polite but strained. And after a moment, the pharmacist shakes his head gently, saying something Ethan cannot hear, and Lily nods, her lips pressing together for a brief second before she reaches into her pocket, pulling out a few folded bills, counting them slowly, then stopping halfway through like she already knows it is not enough. And she gives a small apologetic smile, saying something else, softer this time, and the pharmacist responds with the same kind of regret that does not change the outcome. And she nods again, tucking the money back into her pocket, her shoulders straightening just a little as she turns away from the counter, like she is holding something together by force of will alone. And that is when Ethan steps forward without fully thinking it through, closing the distance between them just enough to be heard. "Excuse me," he says, his voice calm but firm, and both Lily and the pharmacist look at him, surprised. And for a brief second, Lily's expression shifts, recognition flickering across her face, mixed with something else, something like concern, like she did not expect to see him here. "You did not have to follow me," she says quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact. And Ethan meets her gaze, the weight of everything unsaid sitting between them. "I know," he replies, and there is a pause, a moment where he could step back, let this end the way it was supposed to, but instead he looks toward the pharmacist, then back at Lily, and something in his voice changes. Just slightly, enough to hint that the line between who he is and who he is pretending to be is starting to blur. "How much is it?" he asks, and Lily's eyes widen just a fraction, her head shaking immediately. No, she says, quick, firm, the first real resistance he has seen from her. You do not owe me anything. And Ethan does not respond right away, because he realizes this is not about money, not for her, not in the way it usually is for everyone else. This is about dignity, about not turning a moment of kindness into a transaction. And as he stands there, caught between helping and respecting that boundary, he understands that whatever happens next will not be as simple as offering something in return, because for the first time, the rules he knows no longer apply. The word hangs between them longer than it should, not loud, not dramatic, just firm enough to draw a line that Ethan did not expect, and Lily steps back half a pace, her hand instinctively tightening around the strap of her bag like she is bracing for something invisible. And for a moment neither of them speaks, the quiet hum of the pharmacy filling the space, the soft beep of a register, the faint rustle of paper bags behind the counter, and Ethan realizes that every move he has ever made in his life has been based on solving problems with resources, with leverage, with the simple assumption that if something is missing, he can provide it. But standing here, looking at her, he understands that what she is protecting is not the cost of the medication, it is the meaning behind the moment, and he lowers his voice slightly, shifting his approach. I am not trying to pay you back, he says carefully, choosing each word like it matters, because for once, it does, and she studies him, searching for something in his expression, something that proves whether he understands or not, and he holds her gaze, not defensive, not pushing, just present. Then what are you trying to do? She asks, and there is no anger in it, only caution, the kind built from too many situations where help came with conditions attached. And Ethan pauses, because the honest answer is not something he is used to saying out loud. Not in situations like this. I am trying to not walk away, he admits, and that shifts something. Just slightly, not enough to dissolve the tension, but enough to make her look at him differently, like she is reconsidering the intention behind his presence. And the pharmacist clears his throat gently, breaking the moment. The total is $48, he says, glancing between them with polite neutrality. And Lily looks away first, a small exhale leaving her lips, the reality of the number settling back in, and she shakes her head, almost to herself this time. It is fine, she says quietly. I will come back tomorrow. Even though the way she says it makes it clear that tomorrow is uncertain, and Ethan feels that again, that gap between what is said and what is real, and instead of reaching for money, instead of forcing a solution, he does something unfamiliar. He steps slightly to the side, giving her space rather than closing it. Is it for you? He asks, softer now. And she hesitates, then shakes her head. No, she answers, and that single word carries more weight than the rest of the conversation combined. And he nods slowly, absorbing that, recalibrating in a way he has never had to before. Then let me help you figure something out, he says, not offering to fix it, not offering to buy it, just offering to stay in the problem with her. And she watches him carefully, like she is measuring whether that is real or just another version of the same thing. And after a few seconds, her shoulders relax just slightly, not fully, but enough to signal that she is not walking away yet. There is nothing to figure out, she says, though her voice is quieter now, less certain. It just costs more than I have. And Ethan nods again, then turns to the pharmacist. Do you have a generic version? He asks, his tone calm, practical, and the pharmacist's expression shifts, surprised but receptive. We do, he says, tapping a few keys on the register. It would. Bring it down to 26. And Lily looks at him quickly, something like relief flickering across her face before she suppresses it. And Ethan glances back at her, not smiling, not making a point of it, just acknowledging the shift, and she exhales slowly, her hand moving back into her pocket as she counts the folded bills again, this time making it to the end, and she places them on the counter, her movements careful, deliberate, like she is reclaiming control over the situation. And when the pharmacist hands her the small paper bag, she holds it for a second longer than necessary, like it represents more than just what is inside. And then she turns back to Ethan, her expression different now, still guarded, but softer around the edges. Thank you, she says quietly, and this time, the words feel balanced, not owed, not forced, just shared. And Ethan nods once, the scarf still resting around his neck, the warmth of it reminding him that this moment did not start here. It started on a cold bench where no one else chose to sit, and as they stepped back out into the night, the rain lighter now, the city still moving around them, he realizes that for the first time, he is not trying to change the outcome. He is just trying to understand the person walking beside him, and somehow, that feels more important than anything else he came here to find. The rain has softened into a thin mist that clings to the air, barely visible under the streetlights, but enough to leave a cool sheen on the pavement. And as they step out of the pharmacy, the city feels quieter, like the rush has passed, and what remains is the slower, more honest version of the night. And Lily adjusts her grip on the small paper bag, tucking it closer to her chest, as if it matters more than she wants to show. And Ethan walks beside her, not too close, not too distant, matching her pace without thinking about it, the rhythm of their steps falling into sync in a way that feels unplanned but natural. And for a while, neither of them speaks, the silence not uncomfortable, just present, until Lily finally glances at him, her expression thoughtful. "You did not have to stay," she says, her voice quieter now, less guarded than before, and he exhales slowly, looking ahead at the row of dim storefronts. "I know," he replies, echoing his earlier words, "but this time there is something more behind them, something steadier." And she studies him again, like she is trying to solve a puzzle that does not quite fit. "Most people would have left," she says, not accusing, just observing, and Ethan gives a small nod. "Most people were not sitting on that bench tonight," he answers, and that earns the faintest hint of a smile from her, brief but real, and they turn a corner, the street growing quieter, the noise of traffic fading into a distant hum, and Lily slows slightly, stopping in front of an older apartment building, with a flickering hallway light visible through the glass door, and she hesitates there, her hand hovering near the handle before she looks back at him. "This is me," she says, simple, direct, and for a moment, it feels like the end of something that neither of them has fully defined yet, and Ethan nods, taking in the worn steps, the chipped paint around the doorframe, the details he would have never noticed before tonight. "You made it home," he says, and it sounds almost like relief, and she tilts her head slightly, a small crease forming between her brows. "You say that like it was not guaranteed," she replies, and he pauses, considering that, then answers honestly, "For some people, it is not." And she holds his gaze for a second longer, the truth in that statement settling between them, and then she reaches for the door, pushing it open just enough to step inside. But she does not close it right away. Instead, she turns back, her eyes moving briefly to the scarf still around his neck. "Keep it," she says again, softer this time, like she knows he might try to give it back. "You need it more tonight." And he instinctively reaches up, touching the fabric, feeling its warmth, its weight. And something about that gesture makes him hesitate, because giving it back would mean ending this exchange, closing the loop, and he is not ready for that yet. "I will take care of it," he says instead, and she nods, accepting that answer. And then, almost as an afterthought, she adds, "There is a community center on 42nd and Maple. They serve breakfast in the morning, no questions asked." And Ethan memorizes the detail the same way he memorized everything else she has told him, not because he needs it, but because it matters that she said it. And she gives him one last look, not lingering, not dramatic, just enough to acknowledge that something real happened between them tonight. And then she steps inside, the door closing with a soft click that echoes louder than it should, and Ethan stands there for a moment longer, the mist settling on his shoulders, the scarf wrapped around his neck, and for the first time in a long time, he feels the weight of a decision that cannot be delegated, cannot be solved with a meeting or a strategy, because walking away now would mean letting this remain what it started as, a moment, an observation, something temporary. And as he turns to leave, his steps slower than before, he realizes that he does not want this to end as something temporary, not anymore. The night does not feel the same once she disappears behind that door. Something about it lingers, like a quiet echo that refuses to fade, and Ethan stands there longer than he should, the soft glow from the hallway window casting a faint reflection on the wet pavement, his fingers brushing the edge of the scarf again, as if it holds more than just warmth. And for the first time since he stepped into this role, he feels something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not curiosity, not strategy, but something heavier, something personal, And when he finally turns away, his steps are slower, less certain, like each one carries a question he has not answered yet. And the city around him continues as it always does. Taxis passing, distant sirens, the low murmur of late-night conversations drifting from open doorways, but none of it feels as loud as it did before, because his focus has shifted entirely to something much smaller and yet somehow more significant. And as he walks, he reaches into his pocket, pulling out his phone, the screen lighting up with a series of missed calls and messages, names he recognizes instantly, assistants, executives, people who expect immediate responses, people who rely on him to be exactly who he has always been. And for a moment, he just stares at it, the familiar weight of responsibility pressing in, but instead of answering, he locks the screen again, slipping it back into his pocket, because whatever this is, it cannot be rushed back into the world he left behind a few hours ago. And the next morning comes quietly, the sky still gray, the air crisp as the city begins to wake, and Ethan stands across the street from a building that looks nothing like the places he usually enters, the sign above it simple, slightly worn, the words community center barely visible under years of weather, and inside, through the glass doors, he can see movement, people gathering, a small line forming near a long folding table, steam rising from large metal containers, and for a second, he hesitates, not because he does not belong here, but because he knows exactly why he is here, and that realization is harder to face than anything else. But then he steps forward, pushing the door open, the warmth inside greeting him along with the soft hum of quiet conversations. And as he moves further in, he notices the details, the way people hold their cups carefully, the way volunteers move with practiced efficiency, the way no one is rushed, but no one lingers too long either. And then he sees her, standing near the far end of the table, sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back loosely, the same quiet focus in her expression as she hands out small plates, speaking to each person with a level of attention that makes them feel seen, even if only for a moment. And Ethan stops, watching her from a distance, realizing that this is not just something she stumbled into. This is something she chooses, over and over again, even when she has nothing left to spare. And as if sensing his presence, Lily looks up, her eyes scanning the room until they land on him. And for a brief second, surprise crosses her face, followed by something softer, something that almost resembles understanding. And she does not call out to him. She does not ask why he is here. She simply gives a small nod, like she expected this in some quiet way. And Ethan takes a step closer, then another, the space between them closing slowly. And when he finally reaches the table, he does not speak right away, because words feel too small for what this moment represents. And Lily studies him for a second before saying, "You found it," her voice calm, steady, and he nods, glancing around at the room, then back at her. "You told me where to go," he replies, and there is something different in the way he says it, something that acknowledges that this is no longer about directions or places, but about following something he did not understand until now. And she watches him a moment longer, then gestures toward the empty space beside her. "Then do not just stand there," she says quietly. "Help me." And for the first time since this began, Ethan does not hesitate. He steps beside her, reaching for a stack of plates, and as he begins to hand them out, one by one, he realizes that this is the first action he has taken since last night that is not part of a test, not part of a role, but something real, something chosen. And somewhere between the quiet rhythm of serving and the steady presence of the girl beside him, the line between who he was and who he is becoming starts to blur in a way he cannot ignore. The rhythm of the room settles into something steady and almost quiet, plates moving from hand to hand, soft thank yous exchanged in low voices, the scent of warm food filling the space. And Ethan finds himself adjusting to it without thinking, his movements becoming more natural with each passing minute, less careful, less measured, until he is no longer observing what to do, but simply doing it. And beside him, Lily continues the same way she always has, focused, present, offering each person not just a meal, but a moment of dignity that no one else seems to notice. And every so often their hands brush as they pass plates, a brief, unspoken coordination forming between them, and it feels simple, almost ordinary, yet completely different from anything he has experienced before. And when the line finally begins to thin, the last few people stepping away with quiet gratitude, the room softens into a calmer silence. Volunteers wiping tables, stacking chairs, the morning light filtering in through the windows, pale and steady, and Lily leans back slightly against the table, exhaling a breath that carries both relief and exhaustion, and she glances at him, a small, knowing look in her eyes. "You are not very good at standing still, are you?" she says, her voice light but thoughtful, and Ethan gives a faint smile, the first one that does not feel calculated. "I am still learning how," he replies, and she studies him for a second longer, like she is deciding whether to ask the question that has been sitting between them since the moment she saw him walk in. And this time, she does. "Who are you, really?" she asks. Not accusing, not demanding, just honest, and the room around them fades slightly as the weight of that question settles in. Because for the first time, there is no reason to hide behind anything, no reason to continue the role that brought him here. And Ethan looks down briefly, his fingers brushing the edge of the scarf again, the fabric worn but steady, a reminder of where this began. And when he looks back up, his voice is quieter, but clear. "My name is Ethan Carter," he says, and the name hangs there for a moment, unfamiliar in this space, carrying a weight that does not belong among folding tables and paper plates. And Lily does not react immediately, her expression staying still as she processes it, not in shock, not in disbelief, but in quiet understanding, like the pieces she has been noticing are finally fitting together. "You were not testing the food here," she says slowly, and he shakes his head. "No," he admits, "I was testing people, and there is no pride in the confession, no defense, just truth." And Lily looks at him for a long second, her gaze steady, searching for something deeper than the words themselves. And when she speaks again, her voice is softer, but there is an edge of something real beneath it. "And what did you find?" she asks, and Ethan exhales slowly, the answer forming without effort now, because it is no longer theoretical, no longer distant. "I found one person who did not look away," he says, and the simplicity of it carries more meaning than anything else he could have explained. And Lily's eyes shift slightly, something in them softening, but she does not step closer, she does not close the distance, because this moment is not about admiration or reward. It is about truth, and after a second, she nods once. "Then do not turn it into something else," she says quietly. "Do not turn it into a story where you saved someone." And Ethan meets her gaze, understanding exactly what she means, because that would be the easy version, the version he has seen play out 100 times, and he shakes his head. "I am not here to save you," he says, his voice steady. "I am here because you changed something I did not know needed to change, and that lands differently, not as an offer, not as a promise, but as a recognition." And for the first time, Lily allows a small smile to return, not wide.